Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everyone joining from across the globe. I am Devendra Sahu, Associate Professor and Associate Dean of Online Programs at Jindal School of International Affairs. Our Dean, Professor Sriram Chaulia, will be joining us shortly, but in the interest of time and given the urgency of our theme, we shall begin. We are gathered today to discuss navigating a turbulent and volatile world disorder. It is a title that reflects the headlines that we see every day nowadays. Shifting alliances, economic unpredictability, emerging security threats, and so on. First, I'll ask all our attendees, participants joining all across the globe to, in the chat box, put the countries you are coming from. That will give us an idea about everyone and where are you joining from. Thank you. Now, for almost a decade, we spoke about global order, a system defined by predictable alliances, integrated market, international institutions. But today, that order is increasingly becoming a thing of the past. We are now living in an era of polycrisis, whether it is the return of high intensity conflict in Europe, the Middle East, and now what's happening with unpredictability of the tariff structure, the weaponization of supply chains, or the rapid disruption of AI. So we are seeing the volatility today. The turbulent world we are discussing today isn't just about the temporary frictions. It's also about fundamental shift in how power is exercised. We are also seeing a move away from the unipolarity towards a much more fragmented and multipolar reality where middle powers are asserting themselves and non-state actors are holding unprecedented influences and major powers are behaving very unpredictably. So, for all professionals in the field, the challenges is no longer just observing international relations. It is also about navigating them. How do you find stability in a world where the rules-based order is being rewritten in real time, like what we saw happening between Donald Trump and Ukraine President Zelensky in the Oval Office? How do states and organizations build resilience against shocks that are now arriving with increased frequency and with increased intensity? So our goal today is to move beyond the headlines. We have brought together five of JSI's leading experts and also who are teaching in the online program JSI's flagship online program MA in International Relations, Security and Strategy, offered in partnership through Coursera to intervene in this discussion. First, it is my pleasure to introduce Colonel Sasank Ranjan, a veteran with decades of field experience and academic rigor. Professor Colonel Sasank Ranjan provides a peerless bridge between military strategy and academic theory. It is a privilege to have you, Professor Colonel Sasank Ranjan, and I request you to intervene and with your seasoned insight on the topic today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Sahu. I hope I am audible. All right. My greetings to all the attendees of this webinar and, of course, my colleagues, the fellow panelists for the webinar. At the outset, of course, Professor Sahu started with the world disorder or world order. But as part of the MAIRSS faculty, I teach the subject India's rise in world affairs. So I would restrict myself to talk about the navigating the turbulent global order from India's perspective, and rest of my fellow panelists would be touching upon other facets. A global transformation today are far swifter than those that followed the world wars. The global order in the aftermath of the world wars earlier seemed almost glacial in comparison to the mega changes that we are witnessing today. This is what the Professor Sahu made a mention about in the opening remark of his. Several forces are reshaping today's world from supply chain concentrated in one region to geopolitical rivalries over technology and energy, a third of global manufacturing moving to a single geography with attendant consequences for supply chains. There is a rising anti-globalization sentiment in many societies, which have become increasingly inward-looking. Trade calculations are being overturned by tariff volatility we see in the news cycle, as was referred to by Professor Sahu. India continues to navigate this volatility with confidence and foresight, I will add here, with a view to safeguard its interest and yet continuously advance up the global hierarchy. Now, India's strengths basically emanate from four or five key pillars. First is the economic power of India. India is a vast growing major economy projected to become the third largest globally, attracting global attention and trade partnerships. Second is India's strategic autonomy and multi-alignment. India maintains an independent foreign policy, engaging all major powers without aligning strictly with any bloc, adapting to multipolarity. Third is India's assertive diplomacy, I would say. Moving beyond balancing, India is actively shaping global conversations, reforming institutions, and securing its interests. I would talk about on this slightly later. Fourth pillar is India's progress towards achieving self-reliance, or in our parlance, it is the vision is of Atmanirbharta. A push for domestic production, especially in defense, strengthens its military-industrial complex and reduces dependencies, boosting India's prospects to exercise strategic autonomy. And fifth, and the last pillar, of course, the list is not exhaustive, but the fifth pillar I have added is India's prominent voice amongst the global South nation, wherein India acts as a voice for the global South, advocating for equity and partnership in a world moving away from single hegemon dominance. Now, in navigating a turbulent era, India manages an assertive China, unstable Pakistan, evolving Indo-Pacific dynamics, and now an unpredictable United States. All this is being carried out with agile deterrence and engagement by India. India is convinced that more turbulent and unpredictable the global order becomes, the stronger is the case for multi-alignment or strategic autonomy. In respect of India's neighborhood and geopolitical posture, India has multiple neighbors and some are better than others. The hyphenation happens at times, as we are experiencing as of now vis-a-vis Pakistan. From India's perspective, the best way of dehyphenation is to outstrip the other party in terms of power and capability, and this is exactly what India has been endeavoring. Challenges and opportunities for India in the bygone year and times before that. In 2024-2025, India's geopolitical landscape was defined by balancing major power relations, navigating regional instability, pursuing key trade deals, managing energy security amid global conflicts, and addressing economic pressures from Western tariffs, all of the above in the backdrop of enhancing strategic partnerships in areas such as technology and cybersecurity. Indo-US dynamics included dealing with potential US tariffs, renewed US-Pakistan ties, and efforts to secure a significant trade deal for better market access, a process that is still on. India-EU relations are a deepening strategic partnership focused on trade, technology, cooperation, security, climate, and digital transformation, with both the parties seeking to build resilient economies and counter China's influence under a shared goal of global stability and growth. A major breakthrough was achieved in recently signed India and the European Union's historic free trade agreement. In a move that reshapes the global economic order, the pact unites two of the world's largest markets in a free trade zone of about 2 billion people, roughly a quarter of global GDP. The new pact also includes the first ever India-EU security and defense partnership, a parallel agreement inked alongside the trade deal. We had the APEX European Union leadership for our Republic Day function as chief guest on the day before. As far as China is concerned, India continues a delicate balance of trade with China despite border tensions while managing energy ties and geopolitical pressures over relations with Russia. President Putin's state visit to India in the first week of December last year for the 23rd India-Russia Annual Summit further strengthened the special and privileged strategic partnership between India and Russia. Strengthening energy partnerships with US, Russia, and West Asian nations and navigating global energy market turbulence was handled with relative resilience, facing pressures from global protectionism, leading to efforts to diversify and secure critical mineral supply chains has always remained a challenge, and it's a work in progress as far as India is concerned. India's 8.2% GDP growth in the second quarter of the fiscal year 25-26 was very encouraging. 2025 was marked by global structural shifts, increased nationalism and trade protectionism. India balanced its interests amid global power competition, seeking strategic partnership while maintaining strategic autonomy. As prognosis, I would like to mention that aligning to the world order is not about diplomacy alone. It is also about the progress in internal socio-economic realm, in structural economic reforms, in aspects like ease of doing business, etc. Expectations for India in 2026 and beyond point towards continued strong economic growth. IMF has projected encouraging growth indices for India during the ensuing quarters, with India's GDP projected to grow between 6.5 to 7.4%. While the China-US relationship is widely regarded as the defining geopolitical issue of 21st century, relation between China and and India arguably hold greater long-term significance for Asia and the global order. Together, the two nations account for nearly 40% of the world's population. Yet China-India relations remain complex. Both view themselves as civilizational states, and their rising prominence is creating new areas of competition. Though there has been a relative improvement in relationships over last 18 months, a clearer picture is yet to emerge. The West increasingly sees India only as a counterweight to China, with limited interest in India's success beyond that framework. However, given the essence of recently released US national security doctrine followed by its defense doctrine, the perception about India in context of China may undergo a change. A word about Indian military in 2026 and days ahead. India's Ministry of Defense has several vision documents outlining a 15-year plan for defense modernization and the broader Indian Armed Forces Vision 2047. The vision guides both public and private defense industries on research and development priorities, identifying over 200 weapon systems and technologies. India today stands at a particularly consequential juncture. Its rise is not merely a story of economic growth or demographic weight. It is about the expanding responsibilities and expectations that accompany strategic capability, diplomatic credibility, and normative influence. India is no longer being asked whether it will contribute to addressing global challenges. Rather, it is increasingly expected to do so. This is in many ways what places India at the epicenter of global conversations today. The above is visible in India's calibrated approach to key relationships with US, Europe, Russia, China, West Asia, Indo-Pacific powers, and not to forget South Asia. In a fragmented world, India's approach reflects the logic of strategic hedging, coalition, pluralism, and risk diversification. The coming decades will test whether the international community can reimagine multilateralism, humanize globalization, discipline technology with ethics, and align climate ambition with developmental fairness. As far as the news cycle of the present times are concerned, this seems to be quite a tall order. India intends to be an active shaper of these debates as a civilizational state and as a rising pole in multipolar world. In the end, I would like to submit my take on the Canadian Premier Mark Carney's outstanding speech at Davos recently. What he said about the middle path is what the Indians have been practicing for decades. When India did it, driven by its national interest, we were criticized as fence sitters, who were shy of taking positions. Now the West realizes that the third way is not actually fence sitting, it is standing on one's ground. What Makani said about the rules based order is something we have been saying in the East for quite some time. The rules of the rules based order were framed by a few, and they followed the order as long as they thought it favored them. The rules were not fair. Partnership and cooperation were used as euphemism for subordination. Maybe the churn in the present global order will bring out things which are favorable towards equity of the world community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Colonel Shashank, for giving a perspective on the topic as well as the topic that you cover in the program as well. Now we are joined by Professor Sriram Cholia, Dean of Jindal School of International Affairs. I hand over to you, sir, to take over this webinar from now on.
Thank you, Professor Sahu. Namaste. Salam alaikum. Greetings to all of you. I'm very happy to see so many nationalities represented in the audience once again. You're from dozens of countries, and I've requested you to use the chat box to type in the country you belong to and from where you're coming. So that will help us to also steer this discussion. So turbulent world, requires great deal of ingenuity and improvisation and change to survive. So there are a lot of coping mechanisms, different parts of the world. You are seeing people and countries are responding differently to the global unsettling global conditions right now. We just heard a strong Indian perspective from my colleague Professor Shashank Ranjan, and I'm going to also open it to other colleagues to share their views on this topic. The fact is, the rules-based, so-called rules-based order has effectively collapsed, and so we are either headed towards a law of the jungle, where the might is right, and where those who have the means and the resources will dominate over the weak, or we are going to try and create some pockets of cooperation and coexistence and decency and civilized conduct in some distinct issue areas and some thematic areas or in some parts of the world, and preserve some of the predictability and the certainty. So can we build institutions outside the purview of the troublemakers? As we see, big powers which are violating international law left, right, and center, and are effectively undermining the order that they themselves built. So is it possible to, do something parallelly outside of the structures built by the great powers? My colleague Professor Ranjan was mentioning Mark Carney's speech, the Canadian Prime Minister, and he was talking about all the middle powers coming together and that sort of thing. Whether they can really sustain some kind of order in the middle of this chaos and complete breakdown of rules, I think that's a big challenge. Let me now bring in some of our thematic experts from different regions of the world who cover and teach about this at the Jindal School of International Affairs, including in our Masters in International Relations, Security and Strategy program. Let me bring in my colleague, Professor Shravana Barua. She heads our Center for Southeast Asian Studies. And this region, the ASEAN region, is very, very central, not only for India, but for the world, and has been, a major economic center of dynamism and growth, but also lately has been under a lot of stress due to the ongoing crisis in Myanmar, and also border clashes between Cambodia and Thailand. And from time to time, you do hear of instability in these countries, which are otherwise effectively relatively well governed, and some of which are even of middle income to high income category. So let me bring in my colleague, Professor Shrabana Barua, and ask her what is the turbulence or the volatility in Southeast Asia as you see it, Professor Barua, and what are the means and mechanisms by which this region can be stabilized and can continue to be the miracle that it was in the past, but increasingly seems to be clouded in a lot of trouble.
Thank you, Dean Cholia, for having me. Thank you, Professor Sahu. I hope I'm audible to the 60 plus of you who have joined us, and good evening to all my fellow panelists. What I would do is firstly take up Professor Sriram's questions on Southeast Asia and then move on to the questions that was posed to us. A few of them, I won't take all of them, but the questions were why it's different from past crises, the crisis that we see today. And I love that this is called disorder and not order, because I think that's quite right, because there seems to, at least in the last 2 weeks, I don't know where we are heading with 2026 already. But coming to Southeast Asia, the two factors or the two things on the agenda is Myanmar that you pointed out, and the second one is the Thailand Cambodia conflict. On Myanmar, I'll keep it very brief. I'm not sure how much of our the candidates who have joined us know, but it touches upon India's northeastern states, and it's very, very critical for India. But of course, because so many of you don't, you don't really technically have to care about this country, just as Trump says that he doesn't care to stop more wars anyway. This is what he said to Norway recently because he didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize. But point is, yet Myanmar is very, very important for Southeast Asia. The two main things I would bring in terms of security issues, given that I teach a course called Military Deterrence and Conflict in the 21st Century. From that point of view, particularly, when we look at Myanmar, it has a junta that's ruling and is also the country is undergoing elections, and we know the results, which are quite obvious, that again the junta led parties are going to win, and they have won. But the other point is that how stable is most of these countries of Southeast Asia, which have elites ruling in different parts. Similarly, in Myanmar, we see elite rule for decades and decades, and that hasn't really changed. And I think in other countries, for instance, Thailand is going for election shortly. And again, there are protests there. We will see what happens in the next couple of months in Thailand. But point is that most of these countries in this region have elites ruling them, and they continue to go into some kind of if there's a hung parliament in Thailand, potentially we don't know, but that is also going to be a bone of contention in Southeast Asia again. Similarly, other countries are going to face security issues because of such instability. How that happens? If we take Myanmar, for instance, in 2023 and onwards, it became the golden we talk about the golden crescent and golden triangles. The golden triangle that is there in Myanmar, three neighboring countries, and all of those are in Southeast Asia. The production of opium increased and surpassed Afghanistan from 2023. And that has created security issues. Now, if that can be linked to the Cambodia and Thailand conflict, now this is an old conflict. It's not something that has happened only recently, but it got triggered again, just as conflicts are getting triggered again and again. The point is now the same issue in Myanmar, which is to do with opium and increase of opium, has showed up in this border conflict. Only last week, there was more aggression from the Thai side saying because we are trying to now stop cyber crimes. Now, that's another security issue that we see in this region. Again, uh, I would say coming from single states and moving on to the region. So these are problems that are quite visible. What that does is create crisis, and that obviously leads on or adds on to disorder as we see today. But the larger picture, if we can move away from Southeast Asia to slightly zoom out, we see the one big issue that Southeast Asia largely is dealing with is this tussle between the US and China playing out their games in the Indo-Pacific, and whether it's the South China Sea, where China, if we draw two poles, though I know that this is not a bipolar world as clearly as it was visible during the Cold War. Some agree that it is quite bipolar, but I don't think so. As Professor Cholia has mentioned, we see a lot of multi alignments and we don't know where it's heading. But in Southeast Asia, at least, if we see a bigger picture with US on one side and China on one side, we have Philippines, for instance, which is completely on the US side, and it's clashing with China quite head on in the South China Sea. While on the other side, we see other countries which are somewhere in between, others such as Myanmar, only for instance, where it is said that it is quite a, if we can so use the word, satellite state of the China. At one point, it was like a satellite state of the Chinese. So there are these problems, but roughly the bigger problem is that they are dealing with a global crisis. Now that crisis has is not so simple anymore. It's not just a conflict or a global trade war between the US and China, of course. Uh, like I mentioned, the last 2 weeks, I'm usually an optimistic person, but I don't know what is. A lot of you are from the US, or at least currently in the US. I don't know what is happening there. But with, I think, President Trump only saying that, and I also saw somebody from Venezuela, for instance. So interesting. What a mix of crowd we have today. But it started recently in the last 1 month. It started with Venezuela, some threats to Canada from the US point of view. There are also now, the the USS Abraham Lincoln is in the Strait of Hormuz. It's gone up to the Iranian side. So there is already a separate conflict and such a big issue happening. Whether you see the peace accord that President Trump has again come up with, and I see a lot of my Pakistani friends who've very readily agreed to join this peace accord of the US. But again, it's something that we don't know what really is going to happen. And some are also saying that it's really challenging the way the UN is solving the crisis. So at the end of the day, just coming to the first question, why it's different from past crises, I think the main factor, in my opinion, sorry to really hurt sentiments here, but I think President Trump is really ruffling some waters here. If he talk from a theoretical point of view, we look at neo-realism. We see Gideon Rose talking about looking at individuals and studying leaders. So I think this is a point we really need to study individual leaders and see how international relations change despite systemic forces that, say, Kenneth Walls talks about. But one is that. The second is that it's different from past crises, and I'm talking about the last century, because like I said, I teach deterrence and conflict in the 21st century. So just from the previous centuries, or say World War One, Two, Cold War, and so on, the thing is that we have a very complex world today. Earlier, if we could, even in realist term, if we could simply say it was a billiard board model where there are balls that strike each other, but they have clear sovereign boundaries. Today we have a very liberalized world where we have a cobweb model, yet this cobweb model is becoming way too complex even in this liberalized world. So point is, today there are new forces that have come about, whether it be the cyber attacks that we talked about in say Myanmar, Thailand, and so on, whether we talk about security threats that are so unconventional, whether we talk clearly defying some of these traditional boundaries which were said to be a way of good governance of big powers. I think all of that is changing, and this is what is clearly very, very different from past crises. And major forces, this is another question that was put to us, that what are the major forces driving this turbulence across regions? I think energy, like Professor Cholia mentioned, resources, those who have resources are definitely getting an edge. We also see, coming back to the nuclear question, of course, it's not that if you have the nuclear power or the nuclear technology and weapon and you are there. It's not just about that, but yet I think we are coming back to a world where we do see that hard power and its projections have become slightly more important in this kind of a world. But let me not go further. I think what I would like to tell everybody is that we have a lot to offer. It's a mixed bag. And I think each of us can give different perspectives. And it's also, I would like to thank Professor Sahu, for inviting me here, because it's so good to see people from such different nationalities. I think we also gain perspectives and learn more from people who are there. So I'll stop here, and thanks. Thank you for joining and being patient.
Thank you, Professor Barua. Yes, it's a wide canvas, and the interesting point she has made is that use of force and resort to force, interventions, and militarism, all these are on the rise. So we are indeed in that kind of a era where the threats and coercion are rising. So really, it's a question: what do smaller powers do when it's a kind of like a million? The in Greek history, there is a famous Melian debate written by Thucydides, and the most iconic line in that is there's a debate between Melos, a small island that is likely to be uh, conquered, and they are being asked to surrender by a much more powerful invading navy that's surrounding Melos. And then one of the famous quotes there is, "The strong do what they can, and the weak must suffer what they must." So, if it's that kind of a world, then really we are looking at very dire circumstances going forward with no rule of law. And that's, I think, the main point, that we are seeing a return to very, very hard edged geopolitics and interventions, and which makes it a much more dangerous world than it was even like 5 years ago. So, we're going to come back to that theme. Let me stay with this region. We just talked about Southeast Asia, but I want to make it now a little broader. Bring in my colleague, Professor Pooja Bhatt. She studies the Indo-Pacific and the broader region, and I want to bring her in to reflect on this region where rivalries and competition is very high, and at the same time we have avoided war so far, but for how long we never know. Is there going to be an attack on Taiwan in this year or in the coming year? Will China take to attempt a complete reordering of the region through force? If the United States can do it in Venezuela, if Russia can do it in Ukraine, then why can't China do it in Taiwan? It's that kind of a, it's no longer a rhetorical question, but something that's probably the only thing that's deterring China is the cost benefit analysis of an attack. It's not because they are morally or normatively predisposed to being much more peaceful. So, uh, Professor Bhatt, your thoughts on security and turbulence in the Indo Pacific, and how can we preserve stability in this region?
Thank you so much, Dr. Chalia, for that leading question. And I'm very excited to talk to everyone about it. And maritime is, of course, as Dr. Chalia said, Indo-Pacific is my area, what I teach. And I can speak in length on the issues of what you hear recently about Houthi piracy, Red Sea crisis, Black Sea. We've been listening about maritime disputes, border disputes, energy disputes, Mediterranean. We have seen immense tensions in South China Sea. Now there are even more tensions with Russian, Iranian shadow ships all over the world. As Professor Burrow also mentioned, USS Abraham Lincoln is actually an entire carrier battle group that is heading towards Iran with its all the AIS systems off. So a lot of things are going in Indo-Pacific and making a lot of change. But before I get into it, I want to start with this year on Jan 3rd, the world woke up when we saw the president of Venezuela being taken up, from his sleep, from his house by the American soldiers and captured back. What exactly happened? And just let's unpack that first before I get there, and why I would want to bring that issue here. So, what exactly happened? So, there were US intelligence agencies, CIA, NSA, they all were, tracking the movements of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro for months. They prepared themselves heavily. There was a CIA team that was deployed undercover in Venezuela months prior to the operation. They had recruited local sources, local people in terms of human intelligence, moles and spies who provided vital information about the president's whereabouts. They had the entire model of president's house, available to to the American soldiers to practice, with in the blinding lights they could operate in that kind of scenario. So all this was actually be supported by satellite imagery, technology, cyber capabilities. The entire light of the entire Caracas area was turned off for a few hours before the operation was taken care. Where I am heading at, the role of intelligence and war and weapons in the war in the current scenario is something we need to look into very much carefully. And this is a subject that I also teach in my course, Intelligence, Weapons, and War. And this is a very recent topic that brings back our attention to the entire ways the wars are being fought. And Indo-Pacific is no different. We are going to face the similar issues. We have been facing the similar issues across the region. What we have seen in Middle Eastern countries and what we have been seeing in China, Taiwan issues and other places. So what I want to bring about here is the idea of the central question that how intelligence and war or weapons revolutionize the entire form and function of war, how state power is determined, how deterrence is established, how diplomacy takes its place. And in this, there are few key points that we need to talk about before we even get into what are the implications of it. First, the way intelligence revolution has taken place. Initially, it was all about human intelligence, where humans were used to provide the data. Now that has transformed into open source intelligence, OSINT that we call. So now the people provide information. There are commercial satellites from companies like Maxar and Planet Labs. They provide real-time battle damage assessments, and that can outpace any system that is available to the militaries at the moment. We are seeing immense privatization of militaries, and so many private companies are coming into the military domain. They're the kind of revolution that they are providing in terms of upgrading the systems, new platforms, forecasting the movements of the adversaries. These all are something that we are seeing more and more happening in the present times. Another issue that we have been seeing with recent wars that are being fought on the basis of new kind of information is also the weapons transformation. How the new kind of weapons, whether you talk about AI-enabled weapons, swarm system, cyber and space, anti-satellite weapons, quantum computing, you name it, and the kind of weapons we have seen in the present war fighting scenario has completely transformed the war fighting for what we have seen over the decades. And this brings us to the major question: how these new developments in both intelligence sharing, intelligence gathering, information dissemination, as well as new kind of weapons, RMA that we call the Revolution in Military Affairs, has been impacting the world order, and how is it making it either safer or is it making it more dangerous? And that is the question we have to actually look into the present times. With this course that we have been teaching at online classes, we'll be trying to figure out each of these issues in terms of how the strategy is built, how the war fighting is thought through, how the weapons help in fighting the war, how intelligence is gathered, what is the role of intelligence. All these issues would be dealt at the conceptual as well as the operational level. But after this, I want to also come up to the second question that was posed to me, that how China will reorder with force. And as Dean Chawla also correctly mentioned just now, that if US can do it to Venezuela, understanding that Venezuela does not have the enough wherewithal to attack it back, can China also do it in Indo-Pacific region with the countries which it thinks cannot revert back? Answer is both yes and no. Indo-Pacific is a diverse region. It comprises of countries powerful, and there are countries who are not so powerful. And it is in this entire domain we have to see how countries are going to. And we have been already seeing there are certain countries. We have the Indo-Pacific in the last 1 decade has been the most militarized region in the entire world. More and more countries have been purchasing weapons, developing weapons in this region. And this gives us very scary signals because not only countries are trying to develop their own weapon systems, but also buy those weapon systems. And that has never happened before. But all of the entire trend shows us that what these countries are preparing is preparing for war, whether they fight by themselves or they fight with certain kind of partnership. So therefore, even if China is thinking of such kind of um, um, activity that what US tried to do with Venezuela, I don't think it would be hard for me to think that the rest the Indo-Pacific countries would not retaliate. The question would be what would be the limit to it? What would be the scope of it? And given the dangerous precedents that we have been seeing within the region, the kind of relation that India-China has, the kind of relation India is already having, other its own others adversaries like Pakistan and and others, and these adversaries combined with China, the kind of dynamics that we are seeing is something that gives us more and more thoughts to think about. That's not going to be an easy answer for Indo-Pacific. And lastly, where I want to stop is, given the fact that Indo-Pacific is also the most fastest developing region for its economic reasons, for the markets it provides, for the population it holds, the kind of humanity that is living in Indo-Pacific, the kind of impact Indo-Pacific would have with such kind of turbulent incidents will not be only limited to Indo-Pacific, but it would be reverberated for the entire world. So nobody will be spared out of these kind of conflicts. And I'll stop there and I will be happy to take any questions which are there. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. But again, friends, what our professors are saying is that if you enroll in our Masters in International Relations, Security and Strategy degree program, you have the opportunity to not only earn a master's degree in a 1 year period, which is completely online, but you can also engage with our scholars on all these contemporary hot issues as well as deeper structural problems that we are all talking about, which are making the world highly unsafe and insecure. Let me bring in my colleague, Professor Hindol Sengupta now. He teaches courses on nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence, and already in the question and answer session, the box, I'm able to see questions about, is it only nuclear deterrence that is preventing World War III from happening? And people are asking, and naturally, every time there's an attack on Iran, for example, or on a Venezuela or on a Philippines, people ask, what if why isn't North Korea being attacked? And maybe it's because North Korea already has nuclear weapons and therefore it is safe. So I would request Professor Sengupta to talk a bit, especially about nuclear weapons, and is it the only guarantee against neo-imperial aggression and the great power hegemony?
Thank you very much, Dean. Professor Cholia has really set up, and my colleagues have set up this conversation very neatly. First, I want to apologize due to some technical reason. I was a few minutes delayed, but I want to take off from what Dean Cholia was saying to really talk about, my colleagues have spoken about the inherent disorder that we're seeing all around. I want to actually argue that beneath all this disorder, there is a clear strategic order that is emerging, and we need to be really cognizant. What is this order? This order actually should make us very worried. The first order, according to me, and I will come to nuclear in just a moment, and there is an order emerging, but I'll come to that. The first order that is emerging is a dramatic strategic search for water. Today, data centers around the world consume around 560 billion liters of water. This is set to double in the near future. Today, if you see what America is hunting for around the world, and so is China, and so is every major power, they're looking for places where these vast data centers could be built, which will have a near unlimited supply of water. This will be one of the most enduring questions in the next decade for the simple reason that in many places, and you're already seeing in places like Chile, trouble and clashes about this question break out because a lot of this water will be taken directly and in competition with agriculture, which brings me to the second, strategic order that is emerging, which is the battle to ensure strategic supplies and sustainable supplies of food. A lot of people, when they look at the world, don't realize that even food security is a dramatic question. And this question is set to increase before it decreases as the world moves towards a particular peak demographic size before it begins to taper off. So if we can find enough water, if that water helps us grow that food, all of this will begin to become really big questions. Remember, already the Chinese have been buying up vast amounts of land, including in Africa, because they know that one of the reasons that they may face further stress is because of food security. I mean, in fact, the internet is full of some of these very quirky stories about all kinds of animals and bugs through which the Chinese are trying to ensure that their protein supply of the future is maintained. Now, all of these things don't come into our conversations about Ukraine, about Gaza, but these are the big picture questions that underline a lot of decision making. Professor Cholia mentioned nuclear. Some of you may have seen this very interesting essay that popped up recently on the need for the Nordic nations to have a comprehensive nuclear deterrent. Now, if the Nordic nations want a nuclear deterrent, there is absolutely no question, and in my mind, there is absolutely no question that Japan is moving towards that direction too. And if Japan is moving towards that direction, in a sense, it's turned towards a more sort of nationalistic politics and nationalist self, then there is no doubt in my mind that South Korea too one day may follow suit. This means that the whole question of nuclear taboo that we used to teach so comprehensively in our classes is, I mean, I often think, what would Nina Tannenwald be thinking with seeing this nuclear taboo collapse all around us? The nuclear taboo that we used to teach in our classes is collapsing in front of our eyes. In fact, in neighboring Bangladesh, even though Bangladesh is a signatory, even neighboring Bangladesh, there have been voices saying, well, why can't we take help from our cousins, the Pakistanis, to develop our own nuclear system? I don't think that's going to happen. That's a bit of flight of fantasy. But certainly in the case of Japan, certainly in the case of the Nordic countries, they have the money, they have the technology. There is no doubt that these thoughts are emerging again and again. And very soon you will see these thoughts will start to get into action. Please remember, what is the biggest thing in Europe today? It is this rearm initiative, which was mentioned even yesterday as all the debate turned towards and conversation turned towards the India-EU trade deal, that India can give scale to this rearm initiative of Europe. So I actually fear, and with the evolution of more and more tactical nuclear weapons, the threshold of when a nuclear conflict might start, in what shape and form it might start, what could trigger it. We used to always worry, all of us who studied nuclear, we used to always worry that a non-state actor, so to speak, will one day get their hands on a nuclear weapon and all hell will break loose. You will remember the Americans always so good connecting their policy with the movies. Already have for decades have been making movies with this terrible scenario that some terrorist group gets their hand on a nuclear weapon and some hero comes and saves the day. Now, this is of course a nightmare scenario, and but today actually I worry less about a terrorist group getting their hands on a dirty bomb, so to speak, but I worry much more that the nuclear taboo is genuinely collapsing. And if this collapses even further, then we are really in a very scary place in the world. And I think all of this creates a situation where there is a dysfunctional order beneath the disorder that we are seeing. So three things I'll go back to just to sum up: quest for water, quest for agriculture and food security, and quest for nuclear weapons. These are the three extremely problematic, but as a trend, you can join the dots, disturbing order facets beneath the disorder that we see in the world. And we would love to talk to all of you much more in detail about all of these subjects, as you become part of our course. Please remember that it's a particular advantage in studying international relations from the vantage point of a country like India today. India, I think, is one of those uniquely resilient countries which has managed to really prove its resilience in the time of war with Ukraine, Gaza, and now, of course, Trump's tariffs and so on and so forth, to showcase what true geopolitical resilience is all about. And our vantage point, rather than just the Anglo-centric or Eurocentric vantage point on the global systems, I think is particularly advantageous today. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sengupta. Yes, indeed. I think if the nuclear taboos are broken, then we are looking at, you know, apocalypse that at one point was considered theoretical, especially the resort to so-called tactical nuclear weapons and smaller weapons that are supposedly for use in battlefield. It's quite scary. And if there's another new nuclear arms race with the US itself restarting testing, as President Trump has said, then we have a situation also of vertical proliferation of countries that already have huge arsenals but may want to compete with their rivals and continue to build up the arsenals into thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons or even more than that. Um, so let me now also bring in my colleague, Professor Preeti Amresh. So she teaches subjects like soft power and diaspora and also Indian foreign policy. And I want to ask her, we have painted a realistic but grim picture of the world that is falling apart, right? So, what is the role for softer elements of diplomacy and cooperation and integration and these kind of trends in this kind of a highly divided and fractious world? And is there any, I mean, if we are saying hard power is king and hard power has become even more definitive and determinant of all outcomes today, then culture and softer forms of connection and friendship between peoples across borders, all these things, what happens to this idea of we as humanity, or we as 8 billion people as all sharing the same planet? And how do we tackle shared challenges like climate crisis and all that if we are so divided and we are getting into more and more of a war prone and uncooperative or conflicting type of relations worldwide? What role do you see for softer factors in this whole thing, Dr. Amrish?
Thank you, Dr. Chawlia. So, greetings and a warm welcome to everyone. I'm Dr. Preeti Amrish, an assistant professor at GSIA. It is my pleasure to welcome the new cohort of students, and I eagerly anticipate to engaging with each of you all as I lead the diplomatic practice sessions of Ambassador Mohan Kumar sir. So, in terms of diplomacy, diplomacy has been a cornerstone of international relations for like several centuries, serving as a vital tool in navigating the complexities of global interdependence and also mitigating conflicts during the hard times or the volatile times. So, as countries weigh for power, resources, and also ideological dominance, diplomacy acts as a sophisticated mechanism or a tool to prevent the escalation of tensions into warfare. So, through diplomatic channels, states engage in dialogue, negotiation, and compromise to address the disputes and build mutually beneficial ties or relationships. So, historical precedents demonstrate that diplomacy can avert catastrophic outcomes by providing a platform for increasingly interconnected world where challenges such as climate change, terrorism, and economic instability transcend the national borders. And diplomacy also enables coordinated efforts to address these threats effectively. So, also, besides this, diplomacy promotes cultural exchange and understanding, thereby enhancing people to people ties and across diverse societies. Therefore, you see that throughout history and continuing into the present day today, diplomacy still remains indispensable to achieving sustainable peace amidst the global upheavals. So when you look at the 21st century, volatile landscape, just characterized by conflicts such as Ukraine war, tensions in Iran, Venezuela, and also Greenland, enhancing diplomacy has become very imperative and important for global stability. So, modern diplomatic efforts here must adapt to rapidly shifting power dynamics and also complex international ties. So, strategic engagement here with adversaries is very crucial. Say, for instance, nuanced dialogues with Iran concerning nuclear proliferation can prevent regional destabilization. Similarly, addressing the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela through cooperative multinational frameworks can also alleviate suffering while also fostering political solutions. And coming to Ukraine conflict, this calls for a robust diplomatic approach that can balance support for sovereignty with a dialogue aimed at de-escalation. And talk about the Arctic region. These regions, which are sensitive, like say, for instance, Greenland, requires multilateral cooperation to manage resources peacefully amidst the climate changes. Here, the modern diplomats are tasked with the delicate art of negotiation within a multi-dimensional landscape marked by power asymmetries and also competing national interests. So, here, effective diplomacy demands not only traditional statecraft skills but also adaptability to evolving dynamics, which are also influenced by non state actors and transnational issues. And this requires harnessing intelligence insights, tech advancements, and also collaborative platforms to build consensus and also mediate conflicts. So, in this intricate geopolitical web, diplomatic strategies must focus on communication, transparency, mutual respect for sovereignty, cultural sensitivity, and also commitment to multilateralism to arrive at sustainable solutions. Therefore, diplomacy here remains very important in mitigating tensions, and also addressing the multifaceted nature of contemporary global challenges while promoting peace and security in an interconnected world. So, with this in mind, the diplomatic practice sessions, which I would be leading, will cover various aspects of diplomacy, including cultural diplomacy, while also addressing current global affairs. So I look forward to our interactions and to explore these critical topics together. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Amaresh. Yeah, there is still hope that diplomacy will prevail rather than brute force. and might is right type of conduct in the world, and even the powerful need diplomacy. So the point is, it's not just necessarily only an alternative to war and to fighting, but also general means by which you can conduct international relations. So one would hope the Indian position always been on any major confrontation is that you should talk it out and find a diplomatic solution. And sometimes it feels like India is not taking a position and simply using a very cliched kind of a approach of saying just have talks and negotiate and find diplomacy. But end of the day, if you don't opt for diplomacy, then what is the alternative? Total destruction
Yes.
of the type that we have seen in Europe and in the Middle East, and maybe seeing in Asia as well if the Chinese wars of aggression continue. Okay, we've
And also, like you mentioned about hard power and soft power. So, in my opinion, both are very crucial. So, like to actually, explain what is hard power. So, for the students, hard power is, use of military force, threats, and also economic sanctions, or, and also to which is used to influence the behavior. On the contrary, soft power is about shaping, preferences through culture, political values, foreign policies, etc. So, when you look at hard power and soft power, globally, so it depends on each country as to how they're going to use, whether hard power is important or soft power. And so, in my opinion, both are very crucial. So, when you include both hard power and soft power, that's what we call as smart power, combination of hard power and soft power. So, yes, in this, what do you have to say, Dr. Chawlia, about this? Which is very important.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like right now hard power is reigning supreme, but there are limits to that, right? So maybe
Yes.
there will be a backlash, and many of these aggressive great powers may ultimately find that they entered into very costly misadventures that backfired. So there may be a phase of moderation of these extreme bullying or coercive tendencies going forward. Therefore, they may then go back to softer means of trying to sustain their influence. It remains to be seen. Okay,
Okay.
we've had one round of comments from all my colleagues here. There are a number of very interesting questions, and I want to take up a few of them. I've answered some. So, students, those of you who are attending this, look at the Q&A box, and we've answered about 7 questions, but there's still some more that are unanswered. And there have been quite a few questions asking what is India's position on the Iran conflict, and how can and given that Iran is now a member of BRICS, what are Russia and China going to, and India, what are they going to do about a potential US attack on Iran and such things? So this is always the challenge for non-Western groupings, right? The Western grouping like NATO are like hard military alliances. So therefore, they have like treaty-bound commitments to come to each other rescue. BRICS is not a military alliance. It's a kind of like a development cooperation type of forum, mostly focused on economic cooperation. So, what happens to Iran if it is attacked by the US, and what will BRICS do about it? It's an interesting question. Does anyone want to come in on this? And by the way, there are other such. What will the Quad in the Indo-Pacific do something if Taiwan is attacked? Same question. I'm just posing from a different region. And will the CELAC or the Organization of American States do something if Cuba is attacked tomorrow for regime change? I'm just giving you different examples of vulnerable countries in different regions of the world. Can regional groupings or organizations or entities or non military types of coalitions or groupings like BRICS make a difference? Or will they just be bystanders and watching helplessly as countries are attacked by be it China or Russia or the US or whoever? So these are important questions that we don't have clear answers. Anyone of my colleagues wants to come in on this? What is the role of these institutions and organizations. Because according to the liberal theory, you can manage problems, and you can make the world cooperative and peaceful by building more and more institutions. But in today's world, are the institutions sufficient? Are they guardrails to stop aggressive powers from going to wars? Anyone wants to come
I,
in on?
uh, Professor Cholia, if I may, I saw the some of the questions on the chat box and just managed to see a few of them on in the Q&A box. But largely, there was one question on China, Taiwan. There was one question on foreign policy recommendation for Venezuela. I don't think so. We are in a position to give that recommendation, so I'll avoid that. And in general, just taking up this underlying, or rather the sentiment of this discussion, that is it just a chaotic world today, or is there hope in international order and international institution? So the first is, I think China's move in Taiwan has been going on for a while, and unlike the US, which, or particularly as far as President Trump is concerned, there won't be clear outrageous statement per se. If they have to do it, they will do it, and they would have done it. They are just reaping out of the situation at the movement and trying to test waters, in my opinion. And if that happens, if tomorrow, say, we have no ROC per se, we just have the PRC. If China takes that step, I think they will definitely not stop at, they have a larger goal. If they will move ahead with all their force and might. But again, like I said, that is not the Chinese way of doing things at the moment. The second question, leaving aside the one on what should Venezuela do given the situation, if this was an ideal world, they could have gone to the UN and things would have been looked upon and looked after. But this is not, as we have all discussed. So I'll leave it to that. But largely, I do think that this is not a situation where we can say that the world is going to crash and there's going to be a third world war, because that's a repeated question I get from students when I teach conflict and deterrence. Yes, the if we talk about coinage of deterrence, nuclear weapon still holds as a deterrence, and that will continue to hold so. But in my opinion, I think there is much weightage in multilateralism as well. In the last couple of years, we have seen that, and this is also coming also from a very Indian point of view, India has done very well in terms of being multi-aligned or strategically aligned, or whatever terminology, strategic autonomy, whatever we use it. We have had different ways in which we are dealing with different partners. The most recent one, or the one that we are celebrating at the moment, is the India EU trade deal. But like that, there have been many different partnerships. We had, for a very small example, we have a deal with Sri Lanka, UAE, and India, and the Trincomalee in Sri Lanka. Just a small example of development partnerships. So the work is still getting done, no matter what the big picture is. So small groupings, trilateralism, bilateral format, or larger multilateral formats still work. Brings me to the question on BRICS. So we have, for instance, somebody said, why is Iran part of BRICS? Say countries like Pakistan, say Indonesia is part of BRICS today. Like you mentioned, Professor Cholia, it's a developmental grouping. It was initially aimed for, it was in fact BRIC, and 2010 South Africa got added, and then the idea was to get together emerging economies of the time. And today, because the economies are in different, obviously we've seen growth. As we, of course, economies will see growth in different ways. But if you simply understand that each country it has risen to in their economic capacity, and hence they want to be a part of organizations like BRICS. Now, there's no harm for expansion of BRICS or XYZ getting together in one forum. If from an Indian point of view, I can give an example. We have territorial issues with China, but we sit with them in BRICS, we sit with them at the SU, and so on. So I think these kind of things, the progresses will keep happening. So this is not in my opinion, the apocalypse is still not here. Multilateralism will find its way slowly and steadily. But the point is, countries particularly bigger and more powerful countries, do have a responsibility. Now, only yesterday I read in the newspaper there is I'm forgetting the term, but an index which has come out by by an organization which states some of these countries in terms of how they are using power responsibly, and India is much ahead than say Russia and a USA and so forth. So there's something definitely that India is doing right, or France is also somewhere closer to India, for instance. So bigger powers have that responsibility, and I think they should realize that. And to do a World War II and then end it, this is not that age, like we said, the 21st century. So the onus really relies on them in many ways, and yet the smaller countries can get together through multilateralism. As you mentioned, it seems like a situation where hard power is prevailing, but yet soft power, or rather smart power, still will have its way, in my opinion.
Thank you so much. Let me bring in Professor Bhatt also, your views on this institutions. And let me also tie it in with one more question. Is the UN finished? Will it be standing in another decade? And is it the end of the UN? President Trump has now created his own board of peace, and he is claiming that it may ultimately replace the UN Security Council. So, again, question of institutions. Ultimately, international relations, you cannot avoid the issue whether institutions are weak or strong. They are there, and the question is what effect are they having, so if you may want to respond to that as well, Professor Bhatt and Professor Sengupta.
Thank you, Dr. Cholia. I think I'll take it further from where Dr. Shravana Beria just left her answer on linking of multilateral organizations to to attack on a particular country. I think that question we need to unpack it more, and to me it looks disconnected, because these multilateral organizations, and Dr. Cholia also mentioned that they are not alliances. It was an alliance idea of attack on one, military alliances basically. That attack on one would be seen as attack on all, and all the countries of the alliance will retaliate basically. These multilateral organizations are mostly Chinese led or India led, and they are trying to frame an alternate kind of world order based on different norms and values. But certain values are consistent if you see the economic diplomacy, the kind of developmental needs that these countries are seeking. So all these multilateral organizations that we're talking, including BRICS and SCO and the others that we're talking about right now, are basically looking for countries to come together for their common development, for their economic growth and everything. And therefore, thinking that if one of the countries of those multilateral organizations would be attacked by one of their adversaries, these countries would directly get involved. That is too much of a wishful thinking. So that is one point. Second, what I want to bring about is that most of these multilateral institutions, when they come up with their charters, and with my little experience of reading of these regional and global institutions, they have somewhere or the other in their charter written that any kind of bilateral conflicts will be kept out of the purview of the multilateral organization. It is very clearly written in SCO, it is very clearly written in BRICS. So I think any kind of bilateral kind of, like Professor Barua said, that China and India continuously keeps on having their kind of bilateral issues, territorial issues, but that does not stop them from talking on BRICS and SCO and other platforms. So these 2 points I wanted to bring, that connecting these international organizations to attack on these countries would be a bit of too much wishful thinking, and we need to unpack each of them separately. And the second question was the Board of Peace. The Board of Peace is looking less like an organization, but it's looked like a billionaire club where you can actually buy your, seat. And therefore, it directly represents the haves of the world, with the country who have this kind of money to pay for the kind of membership for the Board of Peace will be part of. While President Trump might want to take on this huge objective of replacing UN with his idea of board of peace, it seems less and less likely that something of this form will retain for a longer time, because the middle powers and the small powers and the alternate world order that has already, we are seeing in the offing in the recent times, they have realized that these countries have their own standing, they have their own agency, they have their own say in the international affairs. And I therefore replacing UN might not be a case, but I think expanding UN is something which has been a ongoing thing, is something we might go to see in the future at the same time. So here, these were my 2 points that I wanted to make on these issues.
Thank you, Professor Bhatt. Professor Sengupta, your thoughts, final thoughts. We are almost running out of time now. Students, you may just want to use the last 5 minutes to shoot in a few more questions. Keep your questions brief and we'll try to respond to them. Professor Sengupta.
Thank you. I'll just quickly take this question on what is the future of the taboo equating modernization to westernization. Will Western culture or soft power go down? I think this is an expansion of culture in various parts of the world. When the West was at its peak, Western culture became the predominant culture around the world. As Asia rises, there will be greater permeation of Asiatic cultures. You're actually already seeing it with the popularity of South Korean culture around the world. And as an Indian, I would say also Indian culture around the world, Japanese culture around the world, and so on and so forth. My last point, of course, is on this board of peace. I'm of the opinion that the UN, there are there are a lot of bad things or wrong things that perhaps many people say Donald Trump is doing. But I think there is one thing that he's pointing towards. He is, in a sense, pointing towards the fact that NATO and the UN have had their day. And in a sense, these are organizations, especially the UN, are fundamentally broken from within. So unless they dramatically transform, as my colleague Pooja Bhatt was saying, perhaps they'll expand, perhaps they'll transform. If they do not, the need of the hour is new institutions. Perhaps an inadequate move towards that has been made towards in the board of peace. It's a serious move nonetheless, because of course it's America, but there will be new institutions that will emerge if the UN does not radically transform. Thank you.
Right. So students, we've had a fascinating discussion with all our colleagues from the Jindal School of International Affairs who are teaching in the MA International Relations, Security and Strategy degree program, a fully online 1-year program that is open to anyone who has completed a bachelor's degree from anywhere in the world. So we are accepting applications. And before we close the session, I would request my colleagues, Professor Bhavika Bahal and Devendra Sahu, who do the administration and the running of the MA IRSS degree program, to say a few words about the application process and what all you need to do to get into this very, very unique and truly global online program on Coursera. Over to you, Professor Bahal and Sahu.
Thank you so much. I'm Bhavika Behel, and I'm the coordinator for the online programs. So I would like to tell you that this is probably the only master's program that integrates international relations, security studies, strategic analysis in a very cohesive curriculum. So we blend rigorous theory with practical applications, which are taught not just by leading academicians, but also very, very seasoned practitioners. So you gain a deep insight into, let's say, global diplomacy, geopolitical trends, conflict resolution, and strategic policy making. And all this is provided to you with the flexibility of having an online learning environment. The program is also structured in a very comprehensive fashion. We have 60 credits and roughly about 20 to 21 courses that we offer. Some of them are core courses, which is compulsory, and then we have optional courses. In the final term, we also give you the option to pursue a dissertation under the faculty guidance, and it's something that's ideal and something that you would want to consider if you're pivoting your career as a researcher or as an academician. We also have a number of synchronous events. While most of your course is already recorded, we also have things such as live sessions, discussions, and we have a very diverse peer cohort. So you build a very global professional network, which is beneficial to you when you're applying to jobs, or as a lot of you have said in the chat box, that you're changing from a, let's say, corporate industry into, let's say, international affairs. So that becomes a very valuable asset for careers in diplomacy, in international organizations, in policy analysis, and in think tanks. Now, the application process is pretty simple. We have an essay which is divided into two parts. The first bit asks you why is it that you're interested in international relations, and the second bit, we want to know a little bit more about you, what makes you a suitable candidate for our program. Now, we're doing our early round of admissions up till the 31st of January. And if any of this interests you, I encourage you to apply as soon as possible. In the early rounds, we have more seats. It's easier to get in. As we progress, it becomes tougher and tougher. So, if you want an early decision, we really encourage you to apply by the 31st of January for our program. Thank you. Over to Professor Sahu.
Thank you, Dean, for moderating this fascinating session, and to my colleagues for those incisive intervention, and to Professor Bhabika to speak about the program. I'll just respond to a question posed in the chat box. What career prospects are open to the course takers? This is not just for Snehal who posed these questions, but for others who are considering this MIRSS program. So in this program, courses like intelligence analysis and risk assessment and terrorism and unconventional threats prepares the student for roles such as political risk consultant, global security for multinational corporations. Courses like diplomatic practice, negotiating regional and international conflicts. You can pivot into government or corporate diplomacy, managing a firm's interaction with foreign entities. Courses on maritime security and Indo-Pacific geopolitics is highly valued by firms like logistics, energy, infrastructure, those firms that try to navigate the world disorder that we are discussing today. And it's not only the course, we are now entering into our 5th year, and the scale of this program is very unique. We currently host about more than 400 students from about 110 countries, representing every single continent. But it's just also not about geography. It's about the professional DNA of the program, of the classrooms. You will find yourself debating with risk with military officials, strategizing with UN officials and diplomatic personnel, analyzing narratives and narratives with media professionals and risk analysts. So in a volatile world, the best asset you can have is a global and differing perspective. And second, we understand that to study the turbulent world disorder, you shouldn't have to cause turbulence and disorder in your own life. So this is a fully online degree delivered by Coursera, designed specifically for those balancing high-stake careers, family, and other commitments. Crucially, as already Professor Bhabika has said, this is a one-year master's degree program. However, we also offer a flexible track where professionals have the options to move at a slower pace and finish it in 2 years. So, and most importantly, we do not charge any application fee. So, as Professor Bhabika has already said, we are currently accepting application form for the April 2026 cohort, and the class starts on 1st of April 2026. The links to the brochure and application is in the chat box right now. If you have any question, please email us at online@jzu.edu.in. We look forward to seeing many of you in the next cohort. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. Thank you all. And we look forward to seeing many of you, dear students, in our classes in the MIRSS degree program on Coursera. So please use your coming days fruitfully by applying and connecting with our admission staff. And we look forward to taking this discussion forward in the classrooms in a much deeper and a more in-depth way than what we could do in this webinar. Thank you all, and God bless you, and please take care of yourselves. And we will see you again very soon, again like this virtually in the MIRSS degree program. Thank you, folks. Thank you all. Have a good day.